We're going to give you a little overview of the day, and we're going to speak about the philosophy and the context in which we hold this training. This is probably going to be the most that we're going to be talking at you at one time. But we like to start with, this giving you the sense of where we're going. So today we're going to be taking a dive into the world of the magician. And what that means is, for those of you that aren't so familiar with the four archetypes that we use, it's just an opportunity to look at our own shadow material. Owning our shadows is really important to kingship. Being able to say, yeah, I've got that part of me. So we're going to look at that real intensely the rest of today. Tomorrow we're going to dive into more of the lover, open-heartedness, our connections that we carry to other people in our lives and how important that is and how much that impacts everything we do. And then tomorrow afternoon we're going to look at the warrior aspect of this training, which really for us is all about facing death and our mortality. That's kind of the ultimate boundary line. And it's a kind of a different take on warriorship. So one of the things that when we created this training, we did a lot of consulting with Robert Moore and
Doug Gillette?
Huh?
Doug Gillette, right?
And Doug Gillette, yeah. They came to the initial phase of the training process, and they said, we're looking at doing this king training, and both of them just kind of simultaneously said, have you got death in there? So we had to make sure, we had a nice juicy death piece. So we'll be looking at that from a warrior perspective. And then all day on Saturday, we're going to be taking a look at how that kingship lives in you, how it expresses itself, how it flows through you, and get a real sense of how you're being blessed by that all the time and being able to access that, whatever you want to. And then Sunday morning, we end up with the integration piece, how you're going to take this home and how you're going to be able to live this in your life. So, yeah, that's pretty much where we're going, and the guidelines that we're going to give you here in this next few minutes, these are, just guidelines. So, Dimitri, you wanted to say, I think
sure.
you were going to say a little piece about that.
Yeah, I think what I love about this training, like I said, there are a lot of things, is that each archetype is its own route back to sovereign blessing. And what we're really going to experience here, and I don't know anywhere else in the world to do it really, is the magician route back to the sovereign blessing, the warrior route back to the sovereign blessing, the lover route back to the sovereign blessing, and the sovereign route. So that whatever's coming up in your life and inside your sort of internal structures, you can get back to blessing. Very exciting. So, but we want you to recognize that we know that when we talk about archetypes or psychological models or stuff like that this is the map, not the territory, right? It is, it's the menu, it's not the dessert. We take it pretty seriously, but don't get confused. We know if you have a different way of looking at things, that's fine. This isn't in opposition to that, it's just another thing another arrow to put in your quiver. And by the same token, we want to really acknowledge the personal work that you've already done. And at no point in this weekend do we want you to feel like if we're explaining something basic that we think you don't know things or haven't done your work. Men have generally done a lot of work before they come to the Inner King experience. It is an advanced training, as you will see. Please don't feel that if we explain something you already know, we're talking down to you. That's really not our intention. We just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. So that's it for that. Oh, but the next is me. So let's look at the big picture context of one of the ways that we think about this. We really think about this in terms of there are 3 levels of personal development. Once again, this is a map, not the territory. You may come up with 5 or 2 or whatever, but 3 is working well for us lately. The first level...
Let me just say, feel free to take your notebooks out if you want to take notes. I mean, it's totally optional, but...
Yeah, you certainly don't have to take notes. I have often found that taking notes makes things worse.
Yeah, I mean, some people like taking notes. It works. For some people, it doesn't work at all. So we don't mind if you write or if you don't.
And on a break, you can come back to us and say, hey, what was that thing you said about the 3 levels? I'll tell you again, I'm going to love this. So that's not a problem. Level 1 is, I'm going to put this in terms of men, the man who hasn't done any personal work at all. He wants what he wants when he wants it, and he's willing to debase himself and others to get it. All right? That's before any of us have looked at our stuff for whatever reason. And the upsides of that are you do often get what you want when you want it. The downsides of that are it's actually a really destructive way to live. And it just creates havoc everywhere. We all know this. So then we upgrade to level 2. And level 2 really is a 10x improvement on level 1. And that's, in the men that I know, it's usually after they've done some sort of initiatory weekend. But they have some sort of experience where they discover that, I do have feelings. And they actually are important. And then the priority goes from wanting what I want when I want it to wanting to live authentically and congruent with your feelings. All right? That's where we find. If I'm angry, I want to be angry. If I'm sad, I want to be sad. If I'm ashamed, I want to be ashamed. If I'm afraid, I want to be afraid. If I'm happy, I want to be happy. I want to be a congruent man. Massive upgrade over level 1 to get to level 2. But what we've seen in the men's movement for a long time is guys will stay in the men's movement for a while, a year or two, and then they leave often. And we really puzzled for a long time, well, why is that? And I think it's because there's another level beyond that. When we get in touch with our feelings, it's almost like we're at the point of saying, yes, I'm allowed to be me and express me, and I can survive if I'm me. That's level 2, right? But at a certain point, we start wanting something more than that. And that, I think, is the opportunity to upgrade to level 3. And all the work we do with the inner king stuff is about making that shift. The level 3 shift is going from I want to be congruent with my feelings and authentic, which is important, and you cannot skip that step, to the level of I want to live in my sovereign blessing current 24/7, 365. I want to live from blessing all the time. And I want my life to constantly be on a trend towards being more successful at doing that. So what happens then is we start looking at our feelings, our emotions differently. We start seeing any emotion that is not feeling blessed and joy and sovereign kingly energy as actually a signpost to a place inside of us that is not fully experiencing blessing. So if I'm sad, there are appropriate times for all feelings, but I want to be looking at, if I'm sad, where in me isn't experiencing blessing? Can I bring blessing to that place? If I'm angry, I'm believing in a world where I have to live without what I need. Can I bring blessing to that? If I'm afraid, I'm believing in a world that's out to get me in some way, or that's fundamentally dangerous to who I am. Can I bring blessing to that? And so we start to see all of our feelings. Anything that isn't blessing is a finger that points to a place in us that needs blessing. And when we have that, we become, I like to say, the next better version of ourselves. It's like kind of downloading the new software to your phone. It's like downloads the next, look, there's some upgrades here. Suddenly I'm seeing the world differently. I'm living more in love. So our task as kings is to find the places in ourselves where we didn't realize we've exempted from feeling blessed, and to bring blessing to that. And we start to see our upset emotions as our guide back to that. That's the level 3. And I don't know anywhere else really that focuses on this. There probably are. But I really want to start considering the possibility that this could be, if you're not doing it already, your jumping off point to a life of living in blessing and joy and flow. That is something that is in fact possible, no matter what your external circumstances are. And we're going to give you some really good experiences and kind of methodologies this weekend to initiate you into that possibility. That's it for that.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about lineage, your personal lineage earlier. And I just want to briefly mention here the lineage of this training, and that is Bill Kauth, old dear friend of ours, and Cliff Berry, who were also very instrumental in creating this training. And then there were two other men, Rick Payne and Norm Smookler, who were there at the very beginning. And this group of guys got together, created this training.
In what, 1992?
91. And actually in the summer of 90. And then our first training was here in Colorado in 91. And then you came on board a couple of years later. And so, that's where this started. And it really came out of Bill studying with Robert Moore in Chicago. And he just thought, okay, I've started the warrior training. It's got to be more than this. And so he just called us together, basically. He called that group of men together and said, yeah, let's do this. And so we've been doing it ever since. 91 was the first one we did. When we first did it, it was 2 weeks long. And we realized most guys cannot take 2 weeks off. But they got an immersion, I'll say. Then we cut it down to 1 week. And then we decided, no, that's still too long. Let's just take all the best stuff, cram it into 4 days, and then, help guys integrate it later. So that made more sense. This training is fundamentally different than the warrior training, as you can imagine. As you can tell already, it's not an in-your-face training. This is not, nobody's going to be, just remember who created the warrior training. A Marine, So we realized early on that this training is a whole different context. It's a whole different feeling. And it's all about blessing. It's all about choosing. So a sovereign has the choice of how he wants to live his life. And so we think of choice as very important. And that's one thing you get to do in this training. Everything we do in this training, we want you to choose it. And so if we're introducing something and you feel a little uncomfortable about it and you want to sit out, that's totally okay. Sometimes just witnessing a process can be extremely powerful. You can just dip your toe in a little bit, and just see how it feels. You can do the fake it until you make it thing. Or you can just jump in completely and say, yeah, I'm going to go all the way with this. I'm going to see where I can take this. I'm going to take a deep dive. So it's totally up to you how you participate in this training, and we bless it all. We've had men that, just say, geez, I don't know if I got anything. And then on the ride home, they just download, so, yeah. Let's see, I think that's it. And as we said in the guidelines before, if there's any time when you feel like, geez, I have a splitting headache or something, I just have to step out for an hour, just please do take radical freedom. Say, I got to take a nap right now. I'll be back in an hour. But just tell one of the staff so we know where you are and we don't have to worry about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And Tom already touched on it here about this thing about, you get what you came for at any time during the training. There's been a lot of men that have come back and said, I've already got this piece, what I was looking for in the first day. And for a lot of us, myself included, it's been the integration piece. And on me, I remember it was the second day for me walking up the hill after I'd done a piece of work, and it shifted everything for me. That was the time when I felt myself shift. And there's men that come back and let us know it's maybe, when a week after they get home, and somehow something comes up at work and all of a sudden the circuit is on, this blessing thing about work or whatever, blessing who they're there, that they never felt before, and now it integrates. So we really want to offer to yourselves, for all the men, this reminder about allowing this freedom for yourself, that when it comes through, the circuit gets turned on, it comes through you and flows through you, that there's a right time for it. allow yourself to take off the pressure that somehow we're getting toward the end of the thing on Sunday and you're saying, you know what, I haven't got it yet. And so what the hell? I mean, I'm going to go home and was this worth anything? Really, really trust this circuit to work when you need it. And once it gets turned on and you start to work with it more in your life, it becomes very powerful. So that's a great place for staying.
And another way to think about that is, in comparison to maybe some other workshops you might have done, there's no one place in this workshop where you're supposed to get it.
Yeah.
You know? And so that's just a good thing to know.
Yeah. So you'll notice that the pace of this training is very different than other trainings you may have taken. It's a much more relaxed pace. There are breaks. You get to, kind of take a breath every now and then, take a pause, and take a little walk around the room or whatever. And, we'll be in bed, probably by 10 o'clock every night. So it isn't one of those, high intensity things. Kings, take it easy. You don't see the king running into the courtroom and, saying, hey, everybody sit down. No, it's, the king is already there. He's relaxed. He's sitting in his chair. People come to him. I mean, it's like, okay. So that's a much slower pace, much more steady, easy. And we are going to be doing a lot more with our bodies in this training. I mean, paying attention to our bodies. I mean, this is true sovereignty, is about self-care. It's about watching your own pace of things. It's watching how am I reacting emotionally to something and noticing that, being able to pay attention to it, and being slow enough. I mean, what we think is, soul speed is slower. It's not the fast lane. And, Robert Moore talks a lot about this, that all true learning happens in sacred spaces. Most higher institutions were religious institutions at the beginning. It was about coming into some place of connection with that divine energy, and that's where you light up. Because it's coming through you all the time. I mean, it's right here, right now, in your body. So we see the body as kind of the most magnificent manifestation of this higher power coming through the world right now. It's created you as this unique individual person. And we want to pay attention to that. So, yeah, it's a lot about body awareness. You'll notice we'll be doing exercises and movement. We'll be dancing and moving and, but it'll be all the way you want to do it. There's no have to do it a certain way. So, I think that's it.
So also I want to name that there are staff here to support the process. So let's have the staff raise hands and just remind you. We're here to hold the container, to facilitate what's happening, to be resources to be present, and we're also on our own journey. We're in the soup as well, so we hold both of those at the same time. We're also going to be in and out of processes as needed, as available, as the moment unfolds. So we're working some pieces too. Stuff's going to show up for us. And that's part of the soul food that we'll be feeding on, as well as trying to be of service to you. So we want you to relax into the fact that there is a container, and there's a staff that's tracking it, and helping it to do what it's meant to do. And we're also just other men on the journey of blessing and sovereignty right with you.
So, right, we're giving you a lot of context now, right? And like Tom said, I just want to remind you, this is probably as long as we'll talk to you without a break for the whole thing. But we're sort of talking about, we're telling you what we're going to show you. We're telling you about where you're going to go. And it helps to have ways to think about that, to have context to put that in. So another one that we found to be really useful to kind of go into this with is this idea of uphill approach to life and the downhill approach to life. So the uphill approach to life we see as we have a goal, it's at the top of the mountain, and we're going to fight our way to the top of the mountain and make that goal happen. That's the uphill way of living. And so if you're going to do something uphill, you want, and I'm not saying these things are bad, it's just it's a way of doing things. We've got stuff we want. So you want someone to help you plan, you want strategy, you want tactics, you want support group, you want someone to hold you accountable, right? As you're marching up this hill, overcoming difficulties to get to the goal.
There's no other way, right?
Some people feel that that's a young man's game, actually. So there's also a downhill way of looking at things, which is what we suggest leaning into here. That while the uphill is about I have this goal and I'm going to make it happen, the downhill is more I'm going to discover what life has in store for me and find out what it is I believe and what it is I'm meant to do. And these are very different points of view. And people, when you're on one side, it's very difficult to acknowledge the other side, right? People who are into the achieve side of things tend to look at the other side as a bunch of hippie slackers, right? Just, I'm just going to float around, see what happens. And then the people who are really into the downhill, wow, I'm in this process of discovering who I am. Man, can you dig those used car salesmen over on the other side? They can't stop manipulating, and they can't see the forest for the trees. You know what I'm saying? Depending on which side of this you're standing on at any given time, the other side tends to look absurd. I think one of the things that King's able to do is to see that he has freedom to decide which side of that he's on at any given time. We think this workshop is a lot more about being on the downhill side. And a lot of men who come to this training are at a point in their life, like I said a minute ago, a lot of us start thinking, that achieve is kind of a young man's game. Maybe it's time to get into, in my life, what does life have in store for me to discover and be on that side more. So as we're going through this, it's worth looking at this from a downhill perspective, but knowing that when it's time to, right, at any point in our lives, we're going uphill on some things and downhill on other things. So it's just good to know you're allowed to have both those things and you can have them here.
Yeah, so for this next few minutes, we're just going to talk about a little bit more about the magician, the lover, the warrior, and the king, and how it sequences through this training. I already mentioned it, really, but we're just going to start with magician. Go ahead.
Oh, you're there. Okay, so we're talking about how King has... he's like a guy who's looking over the waters, right? And the waters are still, and they're made up of the archetypes, and he can kind of access whichever one he wants, or whatever's necessary in the moment. He can go through the circuit of that archetype and return to his blessing. So we're going to be looking here at the importance of owning your shadows as a way of being a good king or leader in your life. This is important for a couple of reasons. One is, when you're leading, people are going to show up in your business, in your workshop, in your family, in your whatever you're being the king in your realm, who have shadows that you also have. And so they will press your buttons. And you will want to just say, get out of here, you, and exclude them, which is one way of doing things. But unfortunately, a king who really excludes a lot of people just because they're wounded tends to lose the trust of everybody else. Turns out there is a better way, which is knowing how to own your shadow in such a way that you actually have control over it. I used to date a woman who was an animal behaviorist. People would always ask her, I got this dog that barks, how do I stop it? She's like, well, you teach it to bark on cue, then only give the cue when you want the barking to happen. So that's what we do with our shadows. We need to be able to have ways as kings to step into our shadow energy, to fully own it, with there being no real world consequences, and to be able to get the juice or the magic or the new learning out of that, so a new blessing shows up and we get to be a bigger person. And then when that person shows up in our realm, we see a part of ourselves in them, rather than seeing somebody we need to get rid of and execute. So we're going to spend a bunch of time learning how to do that. In a lot of ways, a shadow is like a battery. It's full of energy. All the stuff that I've said that I'm not like, there's tons of energy there. And I know that because if someone shows up with those shadows, I'm controlled by it. Right? It jerks me around. It upsets me. The more I'm able to own it, the more I get the power from that battery to use in any way I want. And if that doesn't make sense yet, it will later today. That's the first place we're going.
Yeah, so I'm going to flip over into the lover aspect that we're going to look at here. And the lover is very, in some ways, very similar to what Dimitri was talking about, and it's all about inclusion. Lovers don't have very many boundaries. They connect with everything, okay? So when we're very little, we connect really powerfully with all our caregivers. I mean, in fact, we were floating around in that little inner ocean for 9 months. You know, we were one person with another person. You know, we didn't notice any difference, okay? So when we get excluded, we feel pain. And that pain connects us to those people. So all of us have these ways of connecting deeply to people in our lives that allowed us to create patterns that then become painful later on. So each of us has those painful patterns. And what we want to do in the lover part of this training is look at some of the ways in which we still carry lots of painful patterns as ways of staying connected to people that are important to us. In fact, most of the issues that recur in our lives are almost always connected to someone that we loved or we cared about. And in this training, it's about looking at that connection, seeing it, acknowledging it, realizing that we're carrying that pain as a loving way of connecting. And sometimes it's even anger that we use as a loving, painful way of staying connected. So,
Can I jump in on it?
yeah, please.
Yeah, have you ever seen somebody, you've all been in men's group, most of you probably, somebody who works the same issue over and over and over again, it never moves? That issue is 50 gets you 250, right? I'm betting that issue is being held on to as a way of loving someone. So letting go of it would actually seem unloving to that person. In fact, suffering with it week after week is a way of loving the person they're trying to stay connected to. You're going to learn here how to just feel the love and let go of the painful way of loving, which is super useful.
Yeah, a little mantra I have in my head is, love is the problem, love is the solution. I mean, we know it, you know? When we know it and own it, we have it. It's good. Okay, so the next piece. I already mentioned this. The way that we're going to look at warriorship in this training is by looking at death. As I said, you know, warriors are all about boundaries, setting up boundaries, saying no, saying yes, drawing the line in the sand. Well, the ultimate line in the sand is that big edge out there that we're all heading toward. Some of us much sooner than later. And so that's what we're going to be doing in this part of the training, is using death as an ally, as a warrior ally. In many warrior traditions, it's like, how do you prepare to go into battle? You realize that this might be the last day of your life. You give honor, you give blessing, you look at death over your left shoulder, and you go, you know. And in this training, you're going to be able to start looking at death as an ally for yourself, using it as a sword of discrimination, and being able to see that when you approach or feel that imminent, you know, black line out there that we don't know what's on the other side of, and feeling our mortality, we can actually use that as a blessing. We can say, yeah, that gives me the courage to live every day much more fully in my life, if I remember that. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to waste any time. I mean, I use it every day for sure. Should I use it? No. Okay. You know, it's like right there. You know, it's like, no, I'm not going to waste my time doing that shit. You know, I'm getting older every day. Let's go for it. So it's a different way to look at warriorship. And I think it's really the most powerful way. So looking forward to sharing that with you.
And of course in the king, right? We're going to spend a day looking at the king from the point of view of, like the king is sort of, he looks up, we might say, and he sees blessing, which becomes a steam inside, enables him to do things, to dream and dare and do. Right? But what are we looking at when we look up? What are we receiving from? And what we found is that when people are upset or are suffering with something, they are tending to believe in something higher, and that something higher they're believing in is usually against them. So if I stop believing, if I get discouraged in my life for some reason, things are going poorly with my wife, and I start to feel like, well, I guess I just can never, I have to give up on having the relationship I always wanted, lower the bar on what I'm after here, and just sort of suffer through. Right? When I start believing that, I'm believing in a world. Well, what we've discovered here is we can actually set out that world and say, okay, if there were some sort of higher power that created this world, what's it like? And they'll say, well, it says you suck, Dimitri, and you just deserve to suffer. I'm like, oh, that's what I'm trying to charge my batteries from. That's not going to work. So what we're going to look at here is, when we honor whatever your belief or unbelief in higher power is, we probably all felt some sort of a blessing. It doesn't matter what language you use. But we're going to look at what do we actually have projected onto our blessing current that takes that unconditional love and turns it into something negative, and learn how to clear that away so we can actually have access to our highest blessing no matter what the situation. So, because that's what we're really after here. We're after that third level of living, right? That level 3 of personal development, where we're saying, yes, difficult things happen in life. Yes, it's challenging. Yes, things are upsetting. But that doesn't mean I can't live in my sense of blessing. But that doesn't just happen because the world isn't set up for you to do that. The world is set up for you to get better at suffering through. Well, if we're going to be kings, we have to reject that way of living and say, no, I'm raising the bar. And I'm going to use whatever tools are available, and we're going to give you a bunch of them. And there's ongoing support after this training if you want it, to really go for and create that life of blessing every day. Like Tom says, it's entirely possible we're going to die someday. We might want to go about getting our house in order and really living in blessing. So that's,
Yeah, one thing that I've been realizing more and more and more, I mean, this is one of those duh moments, but we don't get any training for being. We are all beings, but actually most of the training we get is about doing or believing or feeling. If we're even lucky, we get some, appreciation of the feeling quality. But we very rarely get any, blessing or support or acknowledgement for that part of you that is your unique genius. I mean, how many people have, in this room can say they had somebody in their early life that just said, oh, I love you just the way you are. I want you to be exactly how you are. I want you to bring your unique qualities into the world, Well, I didn't get a whole lot of those messages, except from my grandfather. And, if you were lucky enough to have a grandfather like mine, I got an early dose of that. So I had a sense of what that was like. But I get the feeling when I am out there in the world that most people have no clue what I'm talking about when I say, have you been blessed in your beingness? Or your sovereignty. Sovereignty, what's that? I don't know. So, this is where we're going. We're getting some training in how to remember that in yourself. It's always in there, It's just a question of being blessed for it and allowing it to come out. So, welcome. We're going to take a 5-minute break. So step outside, go wherever you need to go and stretch a little bit.